My name is Rebecca Ghim, and my project is called Dewaste Your Taste. Did you know 1/3 of the food produced in the world for human consumption every year is wasted? That's $1 trillion every year. That's a loss of revenue that could be spent for things like healthcare, public transport, education, etc. 925 million out of 7 billion are starving, yet we annually waste 1.3 billion tons of food, enough to feed 3 billion people. To put that into perspective, if food waste were its own country, it would be the world's third largest greenhouse gas emitter. Food loss in the field are resources like water, land, energy, labor, and capital, which needlessly produce greenhouse gas emissions. Food loss during harvest and in storage translates into lost income for farmers and into higher prices for consumers. In medium or high income countries, food is lost at later stages in the supply chain, meaning consumers play a huge part in industrialized countries. Food is a tricky subject when it comes to circular economy because they're all perishable to a certain point, so it's inherently linear. However, prolonging its life with preservation will minimize waste to begin with. Also, there are more than compost or animal feedstock that can close the loop, such as brewing beer with leftover bread, using coffee grinds as body scrubs, and more. However, there's still not a lot of awareness or urgency when it comes to food waste. That's because food system is driven by food choice, by the consumer, which is influenced by ideals, personal needs and preferences, social framework, and physical and cultural context. It's all governed by what we're comfortable with, what our dietary or religious restrictions are, how we've been educated around healthy food, etc. Our addiction to convenience, such as non-seasonal food, ready all year round, or the rise in demand for non-local food, creating environmental and social impact. For example, the trend for avocado has started a gang war in Mexico. The thirst for chocolate has depleted Ivory Coast of its protected land to grow cacao, so I started to investigate what guards our minds on what's edible and what's preferable. As someone who grew up in between cultures, I was familiar with different behaviors and different culture around food. I was born and raised in Gwangju, South Korea, where our food is famous even amongst Koreans. On the left side of my hometown, we have the ocean, and on the right side, we have rice fields. Our region was the optimal area that had access to all the different resources our land could offer. But I spent most of my adult life in California, and now London. I've always been a food lover, so I was able to experience not only the beauty of diverse food culture, but also the discrimination that follows the unfamiliar. But I couldn't really pinpoint my experience with food bias as such until I saw this tweet. This is kebul, which is a Korean delicacy. J.K. Rowling says I won't be ordering this in a restaurant, truly revolting, and deemed this dish inedible or unpreferable because of how it looks in its raw form, just as foie gras would be. But her personal food choices and experiences in the past deemed foie gras to be a luxury, whereas kebul not. I felt the shame around how my food looks or smells my whole life, but I never really pinpointed this as xenophobia. Which made me wonder, what bias does a Western food, media, and culinary world have towards not just Eastern food, but towards all non-European food? The more I researched, I saw the connections of history, and it's one dominant narrative told by the winners of colonialism, and the current capital system we live in doesn't leave room for minorities' voices or cultures to be legitimized, but more fetishized and exploited. I've been focusing on the environmental impact of our current industrialized food system, but I realized that the social aspect is just as important as reversing industrial agriculture to bring sustainability in a respectful and ethical way. To solidify my assumption about food bias towards Eastern food, I decided to do some more data collection by conducting implicit association test, or IAT, which is a tool commonly used to measure bias by calculating the accuracy and response time of the test. It was first developed in the 90s by Harvard to measure racist bias, but over the years it's been applied to various biases. I built mine to be Eastern food versus Western food, and surprisingly there were more bias towards Western food than Eastern food. The feedback showed that people associated Western food with junk food, or they knew about the food apartheid. And during an interview with Christian Reynolds, a food policy expert, he urged me to consider neophobia, fear of new things, and neophilia, love of new things, that individuals carry to different degrees, because these biases can't be simplified into just cultural or racial. How do I dismantle neophobia and cultural or racial bias through food? I wanted to demystify and destigmatize Eastern food, and I started by collecting knowledge and insights that honors all parts of the food from my hometown and my family to share through a platform. I knew since I was young that Korean cuisine held immense knowledge and insights that were sustainable in regards to low electricity, low waste, and even supports regenerative agriculture by returning rice or sesame seed husks to the soil and using ducks to get rid of leeches instead of chemicals. I interviewed my mom, grandma, cousin's grandma, local street vendors, vegan chefs, and even Buddhist monks. Their view and value of food was quite extraordinary. They've described our body to be a form of fermentation as well, referring to the extensive tradition around fermentation in Korean cuisine. It was important for me to bring that credit and light back onto the people that I interviewed and interacted with through my design solution. Whilst I was interviewing these incredible Korean cooks, I was also connecting with food experts and chefs and home cooks who wanted to learn about Korean cuisine. I started to form a community which began with cooking sessions. I named my project Dewaste Your Taste to highlight minimizing food waste by changing the way you view what's tasty. I believe bringing circularity to food in terms of upcycling used ingredients is a key component to my project, but the way to do that is to open the minds and palates of the consumers. I continued doing these sessions, but I decided to call them open fridge sessions because it was more than a cooking session. It provides information about the origins and the history of the dish and its diversity as well. It's also about learning how to utilize everything in your fridge and then try experimenting with them. I am planning on bringing on farmers, foragers, and other variety of food lovers as hosts for open fridge sessions, which you are all welcome to join. I am now at the stage of creating a website that will hold a participatory digital cookbook. It will be mirroring where the DYT community is coming from and what their sustainable eating focus is. There will be chapters and downloadable templates for the cookbook and even a map that shows the location of specific cultural grocery near your location. I hope to democratize this knowledge instead of making it a fancy branding project that dismisses the collective rituals and sharing culture that the food was born out of. I think this platform can bring circular consumption of food to be easier to follow and even fun when we do it together. Because it only takes a slight change of perspective to view something as wasteful or not. When you're finished with your tea, infuse your leftover tea leaves as a toner. When you have onion skin left over, grind it up and put it into your bread. There will be so many fascinating upcycling tips and tricks for you all. If you'd like to be updated about the upcoming website, please follow Dewaste Your Taste on Instagram. Thank you for listening.